primary engagement obviously is on behalf of the people in the government of Iraq, allowing them to defend themselves and their territory from attacks across the border that were launched from across the border in Syria. That's the reason we went there in the first place, and that's always been the basis of our intervention. I think that the issue that you're identifying, though, of groups mingling with civilian populations is a fiendishly difficult one. I think at one stage there were about 1,000 different groups on the ground in Syria. David's probably got more up-to-date figures now, but it'd be impossible to know groups splintering, splitting. We've got the intervention now of the Russians, who are much less discerning in their targeting than we've been in our targeting, and have not hesitated to drop bombs where they've known there'll be large numbers of civilian casualties. And you've still got the Assad regime that's killed probably 9 or 10 times more people than Daesh or IS has killed. So I don't think, while your question is a valid question, how do we make sure we're getting the right people, there's not a simple answer to this one. This is one of the most complex theatres of war that you can imagine.
All right, let's go to the government side here. Michael Keenan on that.
Well, again, I think these are the sorts of questions that we should be exploring. But the reason we're involved in bombing Syria is because this terrible organisation took over large swathes of that country, and they broke out and took over a very large part of the neighbouring country of Iraq. And airstrikes are part of the military strategy that we have in place to roll that back. It has been slow going, and it's already been pointed out by other members of the panel that targeting is fiendishly difficult, but airstrikes are part of making sure that we're degrading and ultimately destroying this organisation that we must do for the peace and safety of the world. So we will continue to do that regardless of the complexities that are involved.
And I think you do need to say, Michael, as well, that actually this, while the progress is very slow, territory is being reclaimed from IS, their supply routes are being cut off, towns are being taken back. It is difficult, and I don't think anyone would be sanguine about the situation at the moment. But
okay, Tanya, I'm going to bring in David Kilcullen. You've looked at this very closely and the effectiveness of the bombing campaign. What do you say?
Well, I think that it's certainly been very effective in rolling back Islamic State in Iraq, where we've had capable ground forces to work with the air. Where you don't have a capable ground force, then you get into the sort of thing that Zoe was talking about earlier, where you don't really know necessarily who you're striking. And so I think, you know, to your point, Luke, it's like, how do you set it up in such a way that you've got a capable ground force, you've got the kind of intelligence you need, and you've got the air asset all working together in kind of a team? That's actually really hard to do. When it works really well. I'll just make one comment. Australian aircraft, and I've worked obviously in a number of theatres where the Australian Air Force has operated, actually have a really good reputation for avoiding civilian casualties and for essentially not dropping ordnance if they're not 100% sure of what they're dropping on. And that's a well-known feature of Australian operational style, which frankly a lot of other countries don't follow.
Just briefly on the overall effectiveness of the bombing campaign, the coalition bombing campaign in any event, you've compared that to the bombing in Syria, to the NATO bombing in Kosovo and in Serbia, and the tempo of that first bombing in Europe was much, much higher. I mean, is this really an effective bombing campaign?
It has not been very effective to date, and that's in part because we haven't had the ground forces on the ground that we would need to make it a strategic success. But I just echo something that was said before. It's starting to get more effective in Iraq as ground forces are getting better, and we've taken the handcuffs off a little bit on our guys on the ground to enable them to target what they're seeing. So I think it is going to get effective. What I wrote in the book was just comparing numbers. You know, in the invasion of Afghanistan, the average number of strike sorties, so the number of aircraft doing a run per day, was about 110. During Kosovo, it was about 250. In the intervention in Libya, 2011, it was about 48. Over the first 18 months of the intervention in Syria and Iraq, across both countries, it was 14. Now, that actually shows you that huge amounts of care has actually been taken to not strike civilian targets, and it indicates how difficult the targeting is. But also, until you really crank up the pressure on the Islamic State, you're not going to start to see the effects from the air campaign that we've been looking for.